Friends, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. 33-year-old Louis Anacortes was sitting on a freshly made and washed bench made of marine teak and iron overlooking Rife Lake. In happier times, during countless visits here, he and his family swam on the lake. He studied the freshly polished brass plaque on the bench, donated by the Edmonds family of Mossrock in memory of our beloved grandfather Kennewick Edmonds. This bench is designed for everyone so that they can enjoy the beauty of the area that he loved so much. Louis, as a native of these places, read the inscription and laughed shortly, sharply, and bitterly. He knew why old Kennewick loved this area, and in particular, this observation deck, where a bench was strategically placed in his honor. From this place, Kennewick often rested and looked longingly at the crystal blue water that flooded his childhood home several decades ago, when Tacoma City Light built the Mossrock Dam in order to generate electricity for the city. Louis knew that the city of Riff was somewhere out there, but it lay 60 meters below the shimmering surface of the lake, which now reflected the magnificent blue sky and ragged clouds. A variety of local pines grow under the canopy of the forest surrounding the lake. Some of the western whites and ponderos towered into the sky to a height of more than 36 meters. As a child, Louis always dreamed of climbing to the top of one of them to see if he could touch the boundless sky. He had a cherished memory of his late father. Once, when he was a little boy, he and his father lay on their backs on the shore of the lake and rested. Their antique H.L. Leonard bamboo rods were leaning against a tree. They were tuned in to the salmon that thrived in these waters. They looked up at the sky, admiring the amazing work of nature, and at the same time rested. He told his father about his desire to climb to the top of one of the pines. The father was silent for several minutes and did not even pay attention to Louis's statement. At the moment when Louis thought that his father must have missed his words, he began to hum a line from the Jimi Hendrix song, Purple Haze. "Forgive me while I kiss the sky." His father was a terrible singer. He couldn't have brought out a melody, even to save his own life, but it never stopped him from singing. When his father's voice repeated this line, the teenager Louis looked around in embarrassment, praying that no one would witness his singing. However, in his adult life, this incident was pleasantly and indelibly etched into his memory. Louis lost both his parents to cancer when he was very young. This fact, as well as his understanding of genetics, was one of the reasons why this meeting happened. Life is too short. Louis's attention was now focused on the lake itself, almost 23 miles long. It is so deep that no light could penetrate the darkness that enveloped the once vibrant, close-knit community of Rife. The darkness hid all evidence that she had ever existed, because she would never be seen in the light again. Louis considered it an appropriate metaphor for his marriage. To any passerby unfamiliar with the nightmare Louis had been living in lately, it might seem that he was serenely absorbing the secluded beauty of the warm autumn weather that occasionally visited the Pacific Northwest. Locals still call this phenomenon, despite its current political incorrectness, Indian summer, Indian summer. When it comes, there is no more wonderful time and place on earth. It almost makes 9 long months of dreary rains seem bearable. Although Louis looked calm on the outside, he was seething inside. He had to go through this nightmare alone. He was an only child, and he didn't have many friends outside the firehouse. Louis couldn't talk to any of the guys at the station about his problems, because, unlike how they are portrayed on TV, firefighters don't spend all their free time talking about their fears and emotions, sharing intimate moments with their fellow men. No one dares to show weakness in front of others, fearing that they will lose confidence in him. Their lives depend on each other. And even a momentary hesitation caused by the uncertainty that they could trust someone to do the right thing in extreme conditions could be fatal. No, Louis was completely alone in this. He arrived early on purpose because, to tell the truth, he was counting on the healing power of his beloved lake and the magical natural oil of nature to help him survive this meeting, which his future ex-wife asked for. She actually demanded it, and his lawyer said that it would be in his best interests to grant this request. "It will look good in family court," his lawyer instructed him. In addition, his lawyer became increasingly upset that Blaine was constantly creating obstacles to delay the inevitable. Louis couldn't understand why Blaine kept insisting that their marriage could survive her madness. She wants her lawyer to demand a mandatory consultation. It doesn't matter to her that a family court judge in Washington state can't appoint her. Both lawyers tried to talk to Blaine until they were blue in the face, but to no avail. Lewis thought Blaine definitely needed some kind of therapy, but that was no longer his concern. Well, he sighed, thinking to himself, it's all going to end today anyway. Blaine could have demanded a meeting, but Lewis insisted on the spot. He knew that the summer crowds would already be a distant memory, so most likely the place would be given to them alone. This meeting is not going to go the way Blaine expects. He glanced briefly at his watch. She was supposed to arrive in a few minutes, but he knew he actually had plenty of time. On the one hand, Blaine would have to drive a considerable distance along Highway 12, which she hated. She never did anything on time, including their wedding. She was an hour late for that one. He let out the same cynical laugh when a quick memory of it came to him. I thought it would be better if he left the church after being 20 minutes late, as his best man jokingly suggested more than 13 years ago. But he quickly dismissed the thought. The truth was that the first 12.5 years of his marriage to Blaine had been a perfect dream. Lewis loved his two daughters, Rainier and Lacey, more than his life. Rain, as she was called, was Daddy's daughter to the core. She was already studying and preparing to become a firefighter, just like her idolized father. Lacey, on the other hand, was his wife's mini-me. For Lewis, this turned out to be just one of many difficulties. Family courts don't like to separate children. This is also the fact that in Washington state, family law does not set an age that allows a child under the age of 18 to choose which parent to live with during a divorce. However, according to the lawyer, all is not lost yet. Despite the complexity, Washington's divorce and child custody laws allow a husband and wife to jointly submit a child care plan to the court. If the judge considers that the plan is detailed, complete, and financially fair for the children, he usually signs it without changes. The trick, the lawyer told him, was to get his wife to agree to a very difficult offer that Lewis wanted his wife to accept. Lewis was a realist. Even before his lawyer confirmed this to him, he realized that his job as a firefighter at the Riverside Fire Department, known as the RFA, would almost certainly not allow him to get primary custody of his daughters. The dangerous nature of the job and the shift schedule were almost insurmountable obstacles to considering custody. It took time and money, a lot of money, to develop the plan that he put into action. He closed his eyes and thought back to that terrible day a few months ago, when his nightmarish existence began. He couldn't decide if his current life was an episode of The Twilight Zone or a Groundhog Day movie. His reality is both surreal and terrifyingly repetitive. Lewis, honey, can we talk in the living room? You are welcome. He had just completed his pleasant nightly ritual of putting the girls to sleep in their shared bedroom when he heard her voice. Although he needed to get some sleep because his next 24-hour shift was starting tomorrow morning, he couldn't wait to talk to his wife. He hoped Blaine wanted to continue discussing their shared desire to buy their own house. The four of them lived in a rented 3-bedroom apartment and really wanted to buy their own house forever, now that their careers were secured. Both agreed that it was much better to raise their daughters in their own home. He is more constant. On his way to the living room, he looked into the kitchen and took a bottle of water from the refrigerator. He sat down on the worn sofa they inherited from their parents and turned to Blaine, throwing his right leg over his left so that he was facing her. He ruffled Blaine's loose blonde hair, which always covered her ear, for a moment, then carefully tucked it behind her ear and put his hand on her shoulder. How are you, honey? He didn't remember much after that. His memories of their conversation were mostly fragmentary, soul-piercing heartbeats in a kaleidoscope of shock, disbelief, and anger. However, his reaction was crystal clear. Months later, he was still confused by how weak and emotional his reaction was. He was crying, really crying in front of her. It was so pathetic that he could feel pity from Blaine. He stumbled out of the house and walked away from the source of his torment. One good thing about being a firefighter is that there is always a spare bed where you can spend the night. No one ever asked questions about his constant presence. Everyone knew the statistics of divorces at work. A few days later, he was able to piece together what his wife had told him. She didn't ask for permission, she just said what she was going to do. When he finally returned home, he was going to beg his wife not to destroy their family. He was going to beg her to go to counseling with him to find out how their marriage could be saved. But before he could start, he was immediately ambushed by his loving and innocent daughters. Blaine promised him that they would come to a meeting at her parents' house. He turned and looked at his wife, who was standing with a sly, victorious grin on her face. The love he had once felt for her was long gone. Now it has been replaced by a burning hatred. He glanced at Blaine, his normally calm face contorted with rage bordering on murder. For a moment, her look of superiority faded and was replaced by fear. But it was at this moment that his girls started attacking him. In their blissful ignorance, they begged to be told why he was abandoning them. He had to literally break free from the desperate embrace of Rain and Lacey as they begged, screamed, and cried. Rain was the hardest. "Dad, how can I become a firefighter without you?" He knew that this scene would be replayed in his head over and over again until his death, regardless of the outcome. Louis, however, knew that the alternative for his ladies would be worse in the long run. After all, he was grateful to Blaine. In an instant, he turned from a weak victim into a man whose path was clear. One day Louis thanked her in his mind. He regained his dignity and took the first step towards recovery. Today he thanked her. "I know it's hard for you girls, and I hope one day you'll understand me. It's just that your mother and I have become estranged from each other. We want different things from life. But I promise you that I will never leave you. I will see you often and love you forever." He never looked back at Blaine. When he finally freed himself from the clutches of his girls, he purposefully left his apartment for the last time. Since that day, Louis has not said a word to his future ex-wife. Wisely, I let my lawyer speak for me. Louis didn't know if he was dozing off, or if he was so lost in memories that he just lost track of time. "Hello, Louis. Thank you for meeting me. Our daughters miss you very much." Her voice, which had once been a reassuring and caring greeting to him, scratched his mind like fingernails on an old chalkboard. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. "It's showtime. My lawyer, Blaine, told me to do it. In a perfect world, I would never have to look at your ugly face again." He didn't even look at her. He looked directly at the lake, seeking strength in its calm familiarity. He heard her shocked gasp. Yes, she thought this session would be different. Louis smiled involuntarily and looked at her. "I know it's on you, Blaine, but I have to tell you something before you start. This is our last conversation on this topic. If you repeat at least one of those ridiculous reasons that you repeated ad nauseum, that it would supposedly make our marriage stronger, if you tell me again how much you love me, if you say that this is just my fragile male ego standing in the way, if you even hint that you are to blame for the destruction of the family I'll get up right away and leave here. At the moment, you disgust me so much that I feel physically sick of your very presence." "Louis, I don't know." Louis was sure that Blaine was preparing to repeat his sickening, "but I love you both" speech, and raised his hand to her face. "Let me get you out of trouble, Blaine. Do you see this?" He pointed to the large, ubiquitous manila envelope on the bench seat. "These are the divorce papers that will end our marriage. When you leave here in a few minutes, take them with you. You will sign them after your lawyer has reviewed them. Return them to my lawyer's office within 36 hours. He turned away from her to admire the breathtaking view once more, and then continued. "Your lawyer will confirm that everything here meets the state's requirements for a child-rearing plan, but I don't want a cheating wife, so we'll both get a divorce as a result. Now be careful, because this is important." Louis sighed in disappointment, even though he knew deep down that Blaine would make things even more difficult than necessary. The parenting plan is what the family court pays the most attention to. What I'm suggesting is fair. We don't have much savings, so the rest will be split in half. You'll have custody of the girls? What? Aren't you going to fight me for this? Blaine snorted. Of course not. Girls need a mother, and even though you were actually a shitty wife, you were a decent mother. So no. And you will have an apartment so that the girls don't have to change schools or look for new friends. I will pay half the cost of housing and pay more than the minimum required amount of alimony. I will also have enough dates with my girls. Everything is written here." At that moment, a huge amount of emotions flashed through Blaine's mind. She was surprised, pleased, and disappointed at the same time. She hoped that Louis's love for his daughters would keep him at home and preserve their marriage. It was at this point that Blaine began to realize exactly what she had lost and began to cry in earnest. Look, Blaine, the reality is that with my work schedule and the risks of my job, I know I don't have a single chance of getting custody of the girls. Even if you were making love to the entire Seahawks football team on the 50-yard line at halftime of a playoff game, it wouldn't change the fact. But Lewis, can't we? Don't interrupt, Blaine. We're just getting to the point. You should pay very, very close attention to the next part. He squinted at her impatiently, took out a thick envelope the size of a letter from his pocket, and handed it to her. She opened it and started browsing through the contents. As I said before, if the divorce papers are not signed within 36 hours and they do not end up on my lawyer's desk exactly as they are written, all your family members, your colleagues, your manager, as well as everyone else you have ever known, will receive a copy of what is inside. This is your copy. Here is a detailed account in vivid colors of what you did to end your marriage. And, more importantly, a record of what you demanded of me to accept as part of continuing my marriage with you. It was expensive, but it was worth every penny that Lewis spent to get the investigator's report. I will also make sure that my daughters know exactly how and why their family was destroyed. Blaine was clearly shocked by what she saw. She couldn't imagine that it was true. No, it has to be a lie. Her lover couldn't be that kind of person. Lewis is lying. Lewis, to be honest, wasn't sure if he had the courage to go through with it, as it would hurt his girls too much. But, on the other hand, he did not think that he would have to resort to this nuclear option. In addition, it can lead to the fact that he will end up in prison and without a job. He also hoped very much that her lover would turn out to be who Lewis thinks he is. And, most importantly, Blaine is as subservient and trusting as this asshole seems to be. The main thing here, Blaine, is that they should be signed exactly as I suggest. If your lawyer calls mine and says, "my client and I," or if he changes even one comma, period, or semicolon, the gloves will be off and your whole world will know what a piece of shit you are. Blaine, shaken to the core, continued flipping through the investigator's report. She could only keep making meaningless noises, snuffling and crying throughout Lewis's monologue, just shaking her head in disbelief. It shouldn't have happened this way. Why can't Lewis understand? Of course, I'm offering a quid pro quo agreement, so here's what I'm willing to do in exchange for your cooperation. I promise that I will never speak ill of you or blame you for the breakup of our family in the eyes of my daughters. I'll even be polite to your boyfriend if we end up together at one of the girls' parties. Hell, I'll even shake his slimy hand if I have to. In every sense, I will behave politely and civilly, as if we just decided to part amicably. I will do the same with each of your family and friends. I'll even babysit if you and the Slytherin want to go somewhere for the weekend at the last minute. In short, I will be the best ex-husband for any cheating wife. Thanks, Lewis, but it's all so unnecessary. Stop, Blaine. Don't ever mention that piece of shit's name in my presence. Lewis, he's a good guy. He's not. No, Blaine, that's not it. Damn, let's get down to business. Whose idea was it to tell me about your relationship? Him, Lewis. He said it was wrong to deceive a good person like you. Lewis laughed bitterly, interrupting Blaine. Nonsense, Blaine. He did this to ensure that he gets exactly the same reaction from me as you do. Has he already asked when he can move in with you? Her eyes opened wide at the same time as her mouth. Lewis thought she looked exactly like one of her favorite emojis that she loved to use. Blaine was silent. She stared at her hands, which she was clutching fiercely. Her posture was so rigid and fragile that it seemed as if she was afraid that the slightest movement would cause her to turn into a column of dust. That's what I thought, Blaine. It's all written in the report you're holding in your hands. Lewis pointed at the papers in her hands. You're not his first, and you won't be the last. His track record is here. He's not like that. He really loves me. She spoke so softly that Lewis had to strain to hear her pathetic words. This brought a knowing smile to his face. He exhaled slowly, and a peaceful calm descended on him, as if another light breeze from his beloved lake had washed over his face. It's almost over. He knew he had chosen the right path. He understood that there was a risk, but now everything is under control. He was sure that everything would fall into place as he wanted it to. His voice softened considerably. Look at me, Blaine. We're almost done. It's important that you be very attentive. She looked up at him. Her tear-stained face was a mask of confusion, ruined mascara, and fear. Her ideal world was destroyed. When she finally looked into Lewis's eyes, she saw a stony, menacing face with night-black eyes glaring at her. "Take care of my girls, Blaine." "They're our girls, Lewis," she protested weakly. Because of her timidity, it sounded more like a question. "No, Blaine, that's not true. They are my girls. You betrayed them and threw them away, just like me, because you're weak and you can't keep your legs closed. I need you to take care of them for me, at least for a couple of years." What are you talking about?" You could almost smell her fear. "I will never give them back. I already gave it back. You just don't realize it yet. Anyway, your boyfriend will take care of it." He was completely serious. "Has he already used this phrase in relation to you?" "Baby, just take a little of this. It will make our love so much better. Our lovemaking will be so intense that you can't even imagine. All your nerve endings will burn. Here, just wash it down with a little bit of this." She looked shyly at her hands again. "Soon he will share you with his friends." "Come on, baby. Justin is such a good guy. Don't you want to see at least once what it's like to be loved by several men at the same time?" Blaine shook her head slowly, staring into space, muttering, "He won't do that to me. He loves me." "Fuck you, Blaine. In a few months, this jerk will be forcing you into his favorite bars." Lewis was on a roll. "But there is also good news. I have a couple more years before I complete the courses necessary to obtain a bachelor's degree in fire safety. After that, I can apply for the position of fire marshal when Frank retires. Then I will have almost no mandatory hours. This should be the time when you start collapsing and burning down. That's when I'll sue for full custody. By then, you'll probably be so stoned that you won't care." "You're wrong. He's not like that at all. Please, Lewis, I really love you. I love our family. Why can't you see?" "No, you don't see it." Lewis growled at her. "You've never seen it. To be honest, I don't think you're capable of loving anyone but yourself. I was just blinded out of love for who I thought you were. I was just a convenient support for you. The girls have only consolidated your power over me. Maybe we can start over?" With tears in her eyes, she offered. "No, Blaine, we can't. There's nothing left to start with. Besides, you won't give up on him, because then your inadequacy as a wife, mother, and human being will be exposed to the public. No, you're going to keep pretending that you and the asshole are happy and in love with each other. You are deliberately going down the path of self-destruction because you have no choice. Because if you had a choice, deep down you would have to admit to yourself what a scum you are. If you dared to do a self-assessment, you wouldn't be able to live with what you found. Now you have no choice but to live with who you are for the rest of your miserable life. You won't argue with him because you won't want to give up on a fantastic love. That's what you told me when you said I'd have to share you with this parasite. If he eventually threatens to leave you, after he offered, persuaded, and finally promised that he would leave if you didn't give the girls to me, well then, you're going back to the beginning, aren't you?" He smiled at her confusion. "Anyway, I'm going to win and you're going to lose. It's only a matter of time. And I'm a patient guy." Lewis looked around the azure expanse of the lake again. The breeze died down for a moment. The water was like glass in the closet door. "It's time to leave." He swore to himself that he would return here often with his daughters. His girls liked it here, but it wasn't enough. He wanted them to love this place as much as he did. Lewis walked awkwardly around the bench. He put his hands on the smooth, lacquered teak on either side of Blaine's shoulders and wrapped his arms tightly around it. He slowly bent down to whisper in her ear. In a low voice full of malice, he said with calm fury, "Tell your shitty boy that if I get even a hint or even a simple suggestion that he is behaving inappropriately with my daughters, I will kill him. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to kill him. Tell him he won't have to sneak around or look over his shoulder for me, because I'll come at him head-on. I want him to realize at the last moment that I put an end to his miserable fucking existence on this earth. The same goes for you, Blaine." His voice began to tremble, and his throat hurt from the strain. The pressure of his grip increased as adrenaline kicked in with every word he spat at her. "You. Tell him that, Blaine." At the last word, there was a loud crack as the hardwood yielded to Lewis's death grip. Blaine started violently. Lewis looked down curiously at the shattered piece of grating. Was it dry rot, perhaps? For her part, Blaine wasn't looking at him. She didn't stop sobbing and whimpering. Her body was shaking as if she was suffering from hypothermia. Remember, Blaine, it's 36 hours, not 37, and now I'm leaving. He looked down at his hands. His fingernails were broken. His hands were bloody and strewn with shards. Strange. It doesn't hurt at all. He stared at Blaine in silence for a moment. All he saw was the empty shell of something that had once been human. He took one last look at the surroundings, took a deep breath of the pure mountain air, then turned around and left. Morning or evening, who would tell me? What, today or tomorrow? Or is it the end of time?